Did a janitor really get a #1 hit to Elvis Presley? Why did the king of rock and roll never record the song I Will Always Love You, even though he was desperate to? What song did he record after his producer literally got on his knees and begged him? The world of Elvis Presley was a universe unto itself, with its own rules, its own gatekeepers, and its own strange rituals. For a songwriter, getting a song to Elvis wasn't just a career move. It was like winning the lottery. It meant your life was about to change forever. But the path to the king was guarded by a formidable figure, his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, and a close-knit group of friends and associates known as the Memphis Mafia. Breaking through that wall was a near impossible task. It required luck, timing, talent, and sometimes a story so bizarre it could only happen in the world of Elvis. These are the stories of the people who wrote the songs. They are stories of desperation, of accidental genius, of backroom deals, and of heartbreaking near misses. They reveal the machinery behind the myth and the real human moments that created some of the most enduring music of the 20th century. Number 20. Why were two of his biggest songwriters locked in a hotel room? Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller were paid a mere $5,000 to write the entire score for the film Jailhouse Rock. They wrote the 4 songs, including the title track, in under 5 hours. When they first heard Elvis sing their song Hound Dog, they thought he had completely ruined it. The duo almost walked away from Elvis forever after a heated confrontation with Colonel Tom Parker. Jerry Leiber and Mike Stoller were not kids trying to get a break. They were already established, they were professionals, they wrote sharp, witty, and profound songs for black artists. They penned Hound Dog for the powerhouse blues singer Big Mama Thornton. They wrote Kansas City for Wilbert Harrison. They were the architects behind the string of hits for the coasters like Yakety Yak and Charlie Brown. They were New York guys. They were serious about their craft, so when they first heard what this white kid from Memphis had done to Hound Dog, they were not impressed. The original was a raw, powerful blues track, a woman telling a no-good man to get lost. Elvis's version was faster, full of hiccuping energy, and the lyrics were changed. To them, it felt like a parody. They just didn't get it. They thought the guy couldn't sing, but the world got it. The record was a monster hit, selling millions of copies. It made Elvis a superstar. And it made Leiber and Stoller a lot of money, even if they didn't respect the version. Their real journey into the Elvis universe began with the movie Jailhouse Rock. They were in New York when Gene Aberbach, one of the heads of Hill and Range, the publishing company that controlled Elvis's music, called them. He told them Elvis wanted them to write the score for his new movie. Leiber and Stoller said they'd think about it. They weren't movie guys, they were R&B guys. A week later, they still hadn't written anything. They were busy. They were working on other projects. Then Jean Aberbach showed up at their hotel room in New York. He knocked on the door. They let him in. He asked, "Well, boys, where are my songs?" They told him they hadn't written them yet. Aberbach smiled, pushed a big armchair in front of the hotel room door, blocking it completely, and said, "You're not leaving this room until you write my songs." He sat in the chair. He wasn't joking, so Leiber and Stoller, trapped in their own hotel room, got to work. Mike Stoller went to the piano. Jerry Leiber paced the floor. They looked at the script. The main character was a convict who becomes a star. The big scene was a musical number set in a prison. Leiber thought of the phrase Jailhouse Rock. It just popped into his head. He started riffing on lyrics about inmates dancing, Spider Murphy on the saxophone, Little Joe blowing on the slide trombone. The whole band was there. It was a fantasy, a cartoon, but it was electric. Stoller hammered out a driving rock and roll melody. In a few hours, they had not just Jailhouse Rock, but also Tret Me Nice, You're So Square Baby, I Don't Care, and I Want to Be Free. They knocked on the door. They handed the sheet music to Aberbach. He looked it over, smiled, and moved the chair. They were free. The experience was strange, but the results were undeniable. They flew to Los Angeles for the recording session. This was their first time meeting Elvis in person. They walked into the studio and saw him there. He wasn't the wild, hip, swiveling kid they imagined. He was polite, he was respectful, he called them Seer, he knew their work, not just the songs they wrote for him, but all their R&B records. He could sing every single one of them. He was a student of music. They were stunned. This was not the guy they heard butchering Hound Dog. This was a serious artist. Elvis looked at them and said, "I'm never going to work with songwriters I don't know personally again." They worked closely with him on the Jailhouse Rock recordings. Mike Stoller even played piano on the sessions. They showed Elvis how they wanted the songs to sound, the feel, the rhythm. He listened. He absorbed it all. He made the songs his own, but this time with their guidance. The partnership was a massive success. But it was not built to last. The problem, as it often was in Elvis's world, was Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel was Elvis's manager. He was a carnival barker at heart. He controlled every aspect of Elvis's life and career. He also controlled the money. Lieber and Stoller were used to being in charge of their own work. They produced their own records. They had creative control. The Colonel didn't operate that way. After the success of Jailhouse Rock, he sent them a blank contract to sign. It was basically a loyalty oath. It would have made them exclusive staff writers for Elvis with no real power. Lieber read the contract and tore it up. He told the Colonel's man, "Tell the Colonel to go stuff it." That was a language the Colonel understood, but not one he tolerated. Shortly after, Jerry Lieber received a phone call. It was a man from Hill and Range. He told Lieber, "Don't you ever try to communicate with Elvis Presley again? Not by phone, not by mail, not in person." The door had been slammed shut. Just like that, their incredibly fruitful collaboration was over. They never worked directly with Elvis again. Their songs would still be pitched to him through the publishers, but the personal connection, the magic they found in that studio was gone, a victim of the Colonel's control. Number 19, why did a country superstar refuse to let Elvis record her song? Dolly Parton wrote Jolene and I Will Always Love You on the same day. Colonel Tom Parker demanded 50% of the publishing rights to I Will Always Love You in exchange for Elvis recording it. Priscilla Presley told Dolly years later that when she and Elvis divorced, he sang I Will Always Love You to her as they were walking down the courthouse steps. The story of Dolly Parton and Elvis Presley is one of the great what-ifs in music history. It's a story about art, business, and sticking to your principles, even when a fortune is on the line. By the early 1970s, Dolly Parton was a rising star in country music, but she wasn't the global icon she is today. She was known for her work with Porter Wagoner and for a string of solid country hits. One of those hits was a deeply personal song she wrote called I Will Always Love You. The song wasn't about a romantic breakup, it was about a professional one. Dolly wrote it for Porter Wagoner when she decided to leave his television show to pursue a solo career. It was her way of saying, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I have to go my own way. The song was pure, simple, and filled with genuine emotion. It went to number 1 on the country charts in 1974. Someone in the Elvis camp heard it, and Elvis loved it. He connected with the song's feeling of a sad, sweet farewell. He worked up his own powerful, soaring version of it. He was ready to record it. The call came to Dolly Parton. Elvis Presley wants to record your song. For any songwriter, this was the pinnacle. Having Elvis cut your track meant massive exposure and even bigger royalty checks. Dolly was ecstatic. She told everyone she knew. She couldn't believe it. Then came the second call. This one was from Colonel Tom Parker. The Colonel had a standard rule. If Elvis recorded a song, he, and by extension Elvis, got a piece of the publishing. Not a small piece, he wanted half, 50% of all the money the song would ever make from that point forward. This was a common practice for big stars at the time, but the Colonel was particularly aggressive about it. He saw it as his right. He was providing the platform. The songwriter should pay for the privilege. Dolly was faced with an impossible choice. She loved her songs. They were her children. She was a savvy businesswoman, and she knew the value of owning her own publishing. It was her future, her legacy. Giving up half of one of her most personal and beautiful songs felt wrong. It felt like giving away a part of her soul. But this was Elvis Presley, the king. The money would have been life-changing. The prestige was immeasurable. She thought about it long and hard. She cried. It was the hardest business decision she had ever had to make. In the end, she couldn't do it. She picked up the phone and called the Colonel's people back. She said, with a heavy heart, "I'm sorry, but I can't give you the publishing." The response was swift and cold. "Well, then we can't do the song." And that was it. The deal was dead. Elvis never recorded it. Dolly was heartbroken. For years, she wondered if she had made a colossal mistake. People told her she was crazy for turning down Elvis, but she stood by her decision. She owned that song, and she was going to protect it. Years passed. The song was a hit for her again when it was featured in the movie The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. Then, in 1992, Whitney Houston recorded a transcendent version for the soundtrack of The Bodyguard. Whitney's version became one of the best-selling singles of all time. It was a global phenomenon. It made Dolly Parton millions upon millions of dollars, far more than she ever would have made if she had given half of it away to the Colonel. Her business sense had paid off in a way she could never have imagined. But the story has a poignant postscript. Years after Elvis died, Dolly met Priscilla Presley. Priscilla told her that she and Elvis had a deep love for the song. She then shared a private, heartbreaking memory. On the day their divorce was finalized, as they stood on the steps of the courthouse, sad and uncertain about the future, Elvis took her hand. He looked at her and softly he sang the chorus of Dolly's song to her. "And I will always love you." It was his way of saying goodbye. When Dolly heard that, she said it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. The song had reached him after all. It had served its purpose. And in that moment, she knew for certain that she had made the right decision. Number 18, how did a song about poverty become a mainstream hit? Mac Davis wrote "In the Ghetto" after his childhood friend was shot and injured during a robbery. The song was originally called "The Vicious Circle." A record executive at RCA told Davis that recording the song would be a huge mistake for both him and Elvis. Elvis was so emotionally affected by the song that he recorded his master vocal in just one take. By 1968, Elvis Presley was at a crossroads. The cheesy movie era was ending. He had just filmed his legendary '68 comeback special, a raw, powerful performance that reminded the world he was still the king. He was hungry for real music again. He wanted songs that mattered. He wanted to say something. He was tired of singing about clam bakes and race cars. At the same time, a young songwriter from Lubbock, Texas, named Mac Davis was making a name for himself in the music business. He was a staff writer for Nancy Sinatra's publishing company. He had written a few songs Elvis had recorded for his movies, like A Little Less Conversation. But he had a new song, a different kind of song that he knew was special. The inspiration came from his childhood. Davis grew up poor. He had a friend whose father was a house painter. They lived in a rough part of town. One day his friend got into trouble, tried to rob someone, and got shot. The incident stuck with Davis. He thought about the cycle of poverty. A child is born in a ghetto, grows up with no hope, turns to crime, and the cycle repeats with his own child. He called the song "The Vicious Circle." He played it for his publisher. His publisher loved it and sent it to Freddie Beyonstock at Hill and Range, Elvis's publisher. Freddie was a tough, old-school music man. He listened to the demo and immediately sent it on to Elvis's producer, Felton Jarvis. Elvis was in Memphis getting ready for what would become his legendary recording sessions at American Sound Studio. These sessions were designed to relaunch his career with authentic, soulful material. Felton Jarvis heard the song and knew it was perfect for the new serious Elvis. He played it for him. Elvis listened intently. The story goes that he listened to it over and over again, absorbing the lyrics, feeling the weight of the story. He connected with it on a deep level. He had grown up poor in Tupelo and Memphis. He knew these streets. He knew these struggles. He told Felton, "I'm doing that song." But there was a problem. Not everyone in Elvis's world was on board. Some members of his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, were uncomfortable with the song's social commentary. First, they thought it was too political for Elvis. They worried it would alienate his conservative fan base. A powerful executive at RCA Records in Nashville cornered Mac Davis and told him flat out, "You are going to kill his career with this song, and you're going to kill your own career for writing it." The pressure was immense, but Elvis, for once, stood his ground. He was determined. He went into the studio to record it. Mac Davis was there, nervous and excited. He watched as Elvis stepped up to the microphone. The band started the track. Elvis began to sing. As the snow flies, he poured all the emotion he had into the vocal. He wasn't just singing the words, he was living the story. He became the narrator, watching this tragedy unfold. When he finished the take, he was visibly shaken. He turned to the control room and said, I don't think I can do any better than that." Felton Jarvis agreed. That first take was the master. When the song was released, it was a smash hit. It went to number 3 on the Billboard charts. It was Elvis's first top 10 hit in 4 years. It was more than just a hit record, it was a statement. It proved that Elvis Presley was still relevant. He was not just a nostalgia act. He was a contemporary artist with something to say. For Mac Davis, it was a career-making moment. The song that was supposed to ruin him made him a star. It opened the door for him to write more hits for Elvis, like Don't Cry Daddy and Memories, and to launch his own successful career as a singer. It all happened because one man wrote an honest song, and another man was brave enough to sing it. Number 17, which hit song was rescued from the reject pile. Mark James wrote suspicious minds about his own failing marriage, feeling trapped and unable to trust his wife. The song was a commercial flop when James first released it himself in 1968. Chips Moman, the producer of Elvis's American Sound Studio sessions, had to personally lobby Elvis and his entourage to even consider recording the song. The famous fade out and fade in at the end of the record was a creative decision by Moman, intended to mimic the energy of Elvis's live shows. Sometimes a hit song is a matter of being in the right place at the right time. For Mark James, it was more like being in the right place at the last possible minute. In late 1968, James was a staff songwriter at American Sound Studio in Memphis. The studio, run by the legendary producer Chips Moman, was the hottest place in town, churning out hits for artists like Dusty Springfield and Neil Diamond. James was a talented writer, but his own recording career wasn't taking off. He had just released a single called Suspicious Minds. It was a great song, full of passion and paranoia, written about the difficult end of his own marriage. But the record went nowhere. It died a quick and quiet death on the charts. A few months later, in January 1969, Elvis Presley walked into American Sound Studio. This was a comeback. He was there to record the album From Elvis in Memphis, a project designed to reconnect him with his Southern soul and rock and roll roots. Chips Moman was producing. The pressure was on to find great, authentic songs. Moman was a huge believer in Suspicious Minds. He knew it was a hit record waiting to happen. He played the demo for Elvis. Elvis liked it. He learned the song and was ready to cut it. But the Memphis Mafia, Elvis's inner circle, wasn't so sure. They were fiercely protective of Elvis, and they often acted as his filter. They thought the song was okay, but maybe not a single. They advised Elvis to pass on it. The song was put on the back burner. The sessions were incredibly productive. Elvis was on fire, cutting classics like In the Ghetto and Kentucky Rain. As the final night of recording approached, they had a whole album's worth of amazing material. It seemed Suspicious Minds was destined to be forgotten, a failed single by a local songwriter. But Chips Moman was relentless. He believed in that song. He knew it was the hit Elvis was looking for. On the last night, with time running out, Moman made his final stand. He essentially cornered Elvis and his right-hand man, George Klein, in the control room. He pleaded with them. He said, Elvis, you need to record this song. This is a smash. This is the one. He was so passionate, so convinced that Elvis finally relented. He said, okay, Chips, let's do it. They went into the studio after midnight. Everyone was tired. The session was almost over. They laid down the track. It was good, but it wasn't magical yet. Elvis recorded his vocal, and it was powerful. The song had a unique structure with a shifting time signature in the bridge that was tricky. They did several takes. Finally, around 4 a.m., they nailed it. They had the master take, but the story wasn't over. After the sessions, the tapes were sent to RCA in Nashville for mixing. The Colonel and RCA executives were in a dispute with Chips Moman over publishing rights. They wanted to cut Moman and his studio out of the deal. So they took the raw tapes and had an RCA engineer in Las Vegas where Elvis was performing overdub, a horn section, and a choir of female background vocalists. Moman was furious when he heard it. He felt they had watered down the raw Memphis sound. Then came the final touch. When RCA prepared the single for release, producer Felton Jarvis, who was overseeing the final mix, decided to add a false ending. About 3/4 of the way through, the song fades out as if it's over. It stays quiet for a few seconds, and then it comes roaring back to life for a final explosive chorus. This was highly unusual for a pop single at the time. The story is that Jarvis did it to mimic the way Elvis would extend his songs live, drawing out the energy and excitement. It was a brilliant move. It made the record unforgettable. Suspicious Minds was released in the fall of 1969. It shot to #1 on the Billboard charts. It was Elvis's 18th and final #1 hit in the United States. It became his signature song of the 1970s, the triumphant finale of his live shows, and it all happened because a determined producer refused to let a great song die on the reject pile. For Mark James, the writer of a forgotten flop, it was the ultimate vindication. Number 16, what hit song was written by a janitor? Otis Blackwell, who wrote Don't Be Cruel and All Shook Up, never met Elvis Presley in person. He was so worried about being cheated out of royalties that he sold the co-writing credit on Don't Be Cruel to Elvis for a few $1,000s, a decision that cost him millions. And Blackwell often created his demos by banging on a piece of cardboard to create a beat. The story of Otis Blackwell is one of the most fascinating and, in some ways, tragic in the history of rock and roll. Blackwell was a true original, a pioneer. He was a black songwriter from Brooklyn who wrote some of the whitest sounding, most iconic rock and roll hits of the 1950s. And he did it all from the shadows. Blackwell wasn't a janitor when he wrote for Elvis, but his beginnings were humble. He was trying to make it as a singer himself, but he quickly realized his real talent was in writing. He had a unique ability to craft catchy, infectious pop songs with a bluesy edge. His big break came with the song Fever, which became a huge hit for Little Willie John and later Peggy Lee. His connection to Elvis started through the music publishing system. Blackwell was under contract with a company called Shalimar Music. The publishers were always on the lookout for songs for their biggest clients. Elvis was the biggest client of all. One day in 1956, Blackwell wrote a song called Don't Be Cruel. The story goes that he wrote it quickly, just another song in a day's work. He made a simple demo, probably just him singing and slapping a rhythm on a desk or a piece of cardboard. He sold the song outright to his publisher for a flat fee, which was a common practice for struggling writers at the time. The publisher sent the demo to Freddie Bienstock at Hill and Range. Bienstock knew it was a smash. He took it straight to Elvis. Elvis heard the demo and loved the song's cool, shuffling rhythm and pleading lyrics. He recorded it as the B-side to Hound Dog. But Don't Be Cruel was so popular that it became a hit in its own right. The single with 2 A-sides became one of the biggest records in history. Here's where the story takes a turn. When the record was released, the writing credit read Blackwell Presley. Otis Blackwell's name was there, but so was Elvis's. This was the Colonel's doing. As part of his standard deal, Colonel Parker often demanded a co-writing credit for Elvis on songs he recorded, which meant Elvis and the Colonel would receive a share of the songwriter's royalties. Many writers agreed to this deal because the trade-off was worth it. An Elvis cut meant a massive payday, even if you had to share it. And Blackwell, a savvy but cautious man who had seen other black artists get cheated in the music business, made a pragmatic decision. He agreed to the deal. He understood that half of a giant pie was better than all of a tiny one. He never complained about it publicly. He just kept writing. A year later, he did it again. Al Stanton, one of his publishers, called him up and told him Elvis needed another hit. Stanton was shaking a bottle of Pepsi, and he told Blackwell, "Write a song about a guy who was all shook up." Blackwell went home and wrote "All Shook Up" in a couple of days. He crafted another perfect piece of pop genius. The song's nervous, stuttering energy was a perfect match for Elvis's stage persona. Once again, Elvis loved it. He recorded it, and it became another #1 smash, and once again, the credit read Blackwell Presley. The strangest part of this incredibly successful partnership is that the two men never met. They never spoke on the phone. They never exchanged a letter. Otis Blackwell, the man who wrote the words and music for some of Elvis's most defining hits, the songs that made millions of teenagers scream and dance, was a complete stranger to the man who sang them. He once went to see an Elvis movie, and when one of his songs came on, he stood up in the theater and said, "I wrote that." People just told him to sit down and be quiet. Blackwell continued to write hits for other artists, including Jerry Lee Lewis' Great Balls of Fire and Jimmy Jones' Handy Man. He made a good living from his music, but he never saw the full financial reward for his biggest creations. He remained a behind-the-scenes figure, a ghost in the rock and roll machine, a man whose voice was heard through the king, but whose face was never seen. Number 15. Which song did a producer beg Elvis to record on his knees? Dennis Linde, the writer of Burning Love, initially offered the song to other artists who all turned it down. Elvis's producer, Felton Jarvis, was so convinced the song was a hit that he literally got down on his knees and begged a reluctant Elvis to record it during a late-night session. Burning Love was Elvis's last major hit single in the United States, reaching #2 on the charts in 1972. By 1972, Elvis was deep into his jumpsuit era. He was a Las Vegas powerhouse, a global superstar, but his recorded output had become inconsistent. He was recording a lot of ballads and gospel songs, moving away from the rock and roll that had made him famous. So his producer, Felton Jarvis, was desperate to find a great up-tempo rock song to remind the world that Elvis could still rock. The song came from an unlikely source. Dennis Linde was a Nashville songwriter who wasn't a big name yet. He had written a driving, riff-heavy rock song called Burning Love. It was a great track full of energy and clever lyrics about rising temperatures and smoldering flames of passion. But he couldn't give it away. He pitched it to several artists and they all passed. The song just sat on the shelf. Somehow, the demo made its way to Felton Jarvis. Jarvis heard it and knew instantly this was it. This was the song he had been looking for. It was perfect for Elvis. It had the power, the swagger, the rock and roll heart. He brought the song to a recording session Elvis was holding in Hollywood in March of 1972. But Elvis wasn't interested. He listened to the demo and shrugged. He wasn't in the mood for a rock song. He wanted to sing ballads. He was more focused on gospel material and songs that had a deep emotional message. A fun, simple rock song about being a hunk of burning love just didn't appeal to him at that moment. He told Jarvis no. The session dragged on. They recorded a few other songs, but nothing had the magic Jarvis was looking for. He kept thinking about burning love. He couldn't let it go. He knew it was a #1 record. As the night wore on, Jarvis became more and more desperate. Finally, he decided he had to do something dramatic. According to the musicians who were there, Felton Jarvis walked over to Elvis, who was sitting in a chair in the studio. Jarvis, a grown man and a respected producer, got down on his hands and knees. He looked up at Elvis and begged him. "Elvis, please, man," he said. "Just try this one song for me. If you don't like it, we'll scrap it. But please, just give it a shot." Elvis was taken aback. He had never seen his producer do anything like this. He was amused, but also touched by Jarvis's passion. He looked at his friend and producer kneeling on the floor and finally laughed. "Okay, Felton, okay," he said. "Get up. We'll do your song." They called the band back in. They worked out the arrangement. The band, which included the legendary guitarist James Burton, kicked into the song's iconic opening riff. Elvis stepped up to the mic and started singing, and suddenly everything clicked. He came alive. The playful, swaggering Elvis was back. He attacked the song with energy and humor. They ran through it a few times, and by the end of the night, they had a killer track. When Burning Love was released, it exploded onto the charts. It was a massive, undeniable hit. It reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, held out of the top spot only by Chuck Berry's My Ding-a-Ling. It was Elvis's 40th and final top 10 hit in his lifetime. It became a staple of his live shows, a high-energy crowd pleaser that proved the king still had it. And it all happened because Felton Jarvis was willing to get on his knees and beg for a hit. It was a final brilliant spark of rock and roll glory in the last years of his career. Number 14, How Did a Rainy Night in a Basement Lead to a Hit? Eddie Rabbitt, who later became a huge country star himself, was so broke when he wrote Kentucky Rain that he was sleeping on a friend's couch. He wrote the song during a thunderstorm while sitting in a leaky basement. Elvis heard the demo and immediately decided to record it, bumping another scheduled song from the session. In the late 1960s, Eddie Rabbitt was just another struggling songwriter in Nashville. He had a dream and a guitar, but not much else. He was living a hand-to-mouth existence, crashing on couches and trying to get anyone to listen to his songs. He was far from the country pop superstar who would later sing hits like I Love a Rainy Night and Driven My Life Away. One night he was staying at the home of a fellow songwriter, Dick Hurd. A powerful thunderstorm was rolling through Nashville. Rabbitt was in the basement listening to the rain pound against the small windows. The basement was damp and a little leaky. The sound of the storm was all-consuming. He started to play his guitar, and an idea came to him. He imagined a man, desperate and lost, searching for a woman who had left him. The man is walking through the cold Kentucky rain, thumbing for a ride, showing her picture to strangers. He's on a lonely quest, driven by love and regret. The rhythm of the rainstorm became the rhythm of the song. Rabbitt wrote the melody and most of the lyrics right there in that basement. He took the idea to his friend Dick Hurd, and together they finished the song, polishing the lyrics and structure. They called it Kentucky Rain. They made a simple demo of the song. It was just an acoustic guitar and Rabbitt's voice. They started pitching it around town, but nothing happened. It was just one more song in a sea of songs. But someone got that demo to Lamar Fike, a member of Elvis's Memphis Mafia, who also worked in music publishing. Lamar had a good ear for a hit, and he had a direct line to the king. At this time, Elvis was in the middle of his legendary 1969 American Sound Studio sessions in Memphis. He was recording some of the best music of his career. Lamar Fike brought the demo of Kentucky Rain to the studio and played it for Elvis. Elvis listened. The story, the emotion, the driving rhythm of the song, it all connected with him. He loved the narrative. He could picture the whole story in his mind. He turned to his producer, Chips Moman, and said, I want to do that one. Let's do it tonight. The problem was, the schedule was already set. They were supposed to record another song. But when Elvis wanted something, he usually got it. They bumped the other song and started working on Kentucky Rain. The session was magical. The American Sound Studio band known as the Memphis Boys created a powerful driving track. Ronnie Millsap, who would also go on to become a huge country star, was a session musician at the time, and he played piano on the track. Elvis delivered one of the most passionate and dramatic vocal performances of his career. You can hear the desperation in his voice as he sings about walking and searching through the cold rain. He took a simple story and turned it into a mini-movie. Kentucky Rain was released in 1970 and became a top 20 hit. For Eddie Rabbitt, it was the break he had been waiting for. The royalties from that one song changed his life. It gave him the financial freedom to stop sleeping on couches, and focus on his own career. He was no longer just a struggling songwriter. He was the guy who wrote a hit for Elvis Presley. It was a badge of honor in Nashville. The song, born on a stormy night in a leaky basement, had found its way to the king and become a classic. Number 13, What Does It Take to Write for a Vegas King? Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann wrote over 20 songs for Elvis, including hits like Viva Las Vegas, Little Sister, and Mary's the Name His Latest Flame. Doc Pomus, who contracted polio as a child and used crutches or a wheelchair for his entire adult life, was one of the most prolific and successful rock and roll songwriters of all time. The duo often had to write songs to order based on a movie title or a loose plot description, sometimes overnight. The Elvis Presley of the 1960s was a different beast from the raw, rebellious kid of the 1950s. He was a movie star, and movie stars needed movie songs. This created a new kind of demand. It wasn't about waiting for a stroke of genius from a lone songwriter. It was an industry, it was a machine, and two of the best mechanics in that machine were Doc Pomus and Mort Schumann. Pomus and Schumann were classic brill-building songwriters from New York. They were professionals who could craft a hit song on demand. They had already written huge hits for artists like The Drifters, Save the Last Dance for Me, and Deanna, Teenager in Love. They were masters of pop song construction. When the call came to write for Elvis, they were ready. Their job was often thankless and creatively restrictive. They would get a call from Hill and Range, Elvis's publishing company. The instructions would be simple and direct. We need a song for a movie called Viva Las Vegas. Elvis is a race car driver. It needs to be upbeat. Or the movie is Kissin' Cousins. He plays two characters. One is in the army. One is a hillbilly. We need a song about that. They had to deliver. Often, the deadline was the next day. They would work through the night in their small office with Doc Pomus, a physically imposing man, despite his disability, shouting out lyric ideas, and Mort Schumann, a gifted pianist and vocalist, banging out melodies on the piano. They had a formula, but it was a brilliant one. They knew how to write for Elvis's voice and his persona. They could write a rocker, a ballad, a novelty song, whatever was required. Viva Las Vegas is a perfect example of their genius. They were given a title and a setting. They had probably never even been to Las Vegas, but they captured the frenetic, glittering, high-stakes energy of the city perfectly. The song is a whirlwind of bright lights, spinning roulette wheels, and all-night parties. It's not a deep song, but it is a perfect pop song. It's one of the few Elvis movie songs that has transcended the film it came from to become an anthem for the city itself. They also wrote some of his best non-movie material from that era. Little Sister and Mary's the Name His Latest Flame were recorded as a double-sided hit single in 1961. These songs were sharp, clever, and had a Latin-influenced rhythm that was, a departure for Elvis. They showed he could still be a contemporary pop artist, not just a movie star singing about pineapples in blue Hawaii. Mort Schumann even played piano on the session for those songs, adding his signature feel directly to the record. Working for the Elvis machine was a double-edged sword. It paid the bills. The royalties were enormous. But it could also be frustrating. They would write a song they loved, and it would end up buried on a mediocre soundtrack album. They had no creative control once the song was handed over. It was up to the Colonel, the movie studio, and Elvis to decide what to do with it. Doc Pomus, a former blues singer with a deep love for authentic music, sometimes grew weary of writing songs about beach parties and European vacations. But he was a professional. He took pride in his craft. He knew that even within the constraints of a Hollywood formula, he could create something of quality. He and Mort Schumann provided the fuel that kept the Elvis movie machine running through the 1960s. They weren't writing for art's sake. They were writing for a job. But in the process, they created some of the most fun and enduring songs in the Elvis catalog. Number 12, How Does an Authentic Sound Break Through? And Tony Joe White wrote his famous song Polk Salad Annie about the things he saw and ate growing up in rural Louisiana. Elvis Presley saw White perform the song on a television show in Las Vegas and immediately decided he had to add it to his own live act. White's swamp rock sound was so authentic that Elvis didn't change the arrangement much, instead choosing to emulate White's bluesy, gritty style. By 1970, Elvis was the undisputed king of Las Vegas. His shows at the International Hotel were legendary events. He had a massive orchestra, a gospel choir, and a killer rock and roll band. He could sing anything he wanted. And what he often wanted was music that felt real, music that had dirt on its boots. That's where Tony Joe White came in. Tony Joe White was the real deal. He was a singer and songwriter from Louisiana who had a sound all his own. It was a mixture of blues, rock, and country with a low growling voice and a funky syncopated guitar style. He called it swamp rock. It sounded like it came straight out of the bayou because it did. His biggest hit was a song called Poke Salad Annie. Poke salad is a real dish, a type of cooked greens made from pokeweed, something poor, rural families would eat. The song was a character sketch of a tough backwoods girl. It was gritty, bluesy, and had a spoken word part that was pure storytelling. It wasn't a typical pop song. It was a slice of life. The story of how Elvis discovered the song is pure Vegas. Tony Joe White was in town performing as an opening act. One night, he was a guest on a local talk show. He performed Poke Salad Annie. Elvis happened to be watching television in his hotel suite that night. He saw White's performance and was captivated. The song's raw energy and authenticity appealed to him. It reminded him of the blues and country music he grew up with in Mississippi. He immediately told his people, "Get me that song, I'm putting it in the show." It happened that fast. Elvis's band, led by guitarist James Burton, quickly worked up an arrangement. But they didn't have to do much. The genius of White's song was already there. Elvis didn't try to smooth it out or make it slicker for the Vegas stage. Instead, he leaned into its grittiness. When Elvis performed Poke Salad Annie live, it was a showstopper. He would start with the low, menacing bass line. He would tell the story, his voice a deep growl, just like White's. He'd talk about the gators and the snakes and the poor, mean girl. Then the band would kick in, and the song would explode into a full-blown rock and roll spectacle. Elvis would do his karate moves, the sweat flying from his brow. It was pure primal energy. It was a million miles away from the movie songs about puppy love. The song became a permanent fixture in his set list. He recorded a live version for his album On Stage. For Tony Joe White, it was a life-changing moment. Having Elvis Presley adopt your signature song was the ultimate validation. It also meant a steady stream of royalty checks for the rest of his life. White later wrote another song that Elvis recorded, the soulful ballad, I've Got a Thing About You, Baby. The two men had a mutual respect. Elvis admired White's raw talent and authenticity. White was in awe of Elvis's ability to take a song and make it a global event. The story shows how Elvis, even at the height of his fame and isolation in Las Vegas, was still a music fan. He was still searching, still listening, still looking for a great song that moved him, no matter where it came from. Even if it came from a swamp in Louisiana. Number 11, Can You Get a Song to the King Through a Friend? Red West, a close friend of Elvis's since high school and a core member of the Memphis Mafia, co-wrote the song If Every Day Was Like Christmas. He was nervous to pitch the song directly to his friend and boss, so he gave the demo to another member of the entourage to play for Elvis. Elvis loved the song and recorded it in 1966, and it became one of his most beloved Christmas recordings. Working for Elvis was more than a job. For the men in his inner circle, the Memphis Mafia, it was a 24/7 commitment. They were his bodyguards, his companions, his gatekeepers, and his friends. This close proximity gave them a unique and sometimes awkward opportunity. If you had a creative talent, you had a direct line to the biggest star in the world. But using that line was a delicate business. And Red West was one of Elvis's oldest and closest friends. They had known each other since they were teenagers in Memphis. Red was Elvis's driver and bodyguard from the very beginning. He was a tough guy, a former Marine, but he also had a sensitive side. He liked to write songs. In the mid-1960s, Redco wrote a heartfelt Christmas song with a simple, beautiful message. The song, If Every Day Was Like Christmas, imagined a world where the spirit of peace and goodwill from the holiday season lasted all year long. It was a sincere and hopeful song. Red knew it was good, and he knew it would be perfect for Elvis, but pitching it was complicated. How do you approach your best friend, who is also your boss and the most famous person on the planet, and ask him to record your song? It felt presumptuous. Red was worried Elvis might feel obligated to do it just because they were friends. He didn't want a pity recording. He wanted Elvis to genuinely love the song. So he decided to use a back channel. He made a simple demo of the song. Then he gave the tape to another member of the group, Charlie Hodge. Charlie was Elvis's stage director and a trusted musical confidant. Red's instructions to Charlie were simple: play this for Elvis, but don't tell him I wrote it. Just see what he thinks. One day, when Elvis was relaxing at home, Charlie put the tape on. Elvis listened. The melody was sweet, and the sentiment was right up his alley. And Elvis had a deep love for gospel and spiritual music, and the song's message of peace and brotherhood resonated with him. After the demo finished, Elvis turned to Charlie and said, "I like that. I want to record it. Who wrote it?" Charlie smiled and told him it was Red's song. Elvis was surprised and genuinely pleased. He was happy for his friend. There was no awkwardness, no feeling of obligation. He just loved the song for what it was. Elvis recorded If Every Day Was Like Christmas at a session in Nashville in June 1966. He gave it a warm, sincere vocal performance backed by the Jordanaires. The song was released as a single for the Christmas season and has since become a holiday classic, a staple on Christmas radio stations every December. For Red West, it was a huge moment. It proved he had real talent as a songwriter. He went on to write or co-write several other songs that Elvis recorded, including the powerful ballad Separate Ways, which he wrote about Elvis's divorce from Priscilla. The story shows the unique dynamic within Elvis's world. It was a closed circle, hard for outsiders to penetrate. But for those on the inside, there were opportunities as long as you knew how to navigate the complex relationships. Red West's clever, indirect pitch paid off, giving his friend a timeless holiday song and giving himself the validation he sought as a writer. Number 10. Can a Beatle Write for a King? Paul McCartney wrote a song specifically for Elvis Presley in the 1960s, but he was too nervous to get it to him. Elvis covered 3 Beatles songs during his career: Hey Jude, Something, and Yesterday. John Lennon once famously remarked that Elvis died when he went in the army, but he also acknowledged Elvis's immense influence on the Beatles. It was the ultimate rock and roll summit meeting that never happened. In the mid-1960s, the Beatles were the biggest band in the world, and Elvis Presley was, and always would be, the king. They were the 2 most powerful forces in popular music, the old guard and the new. They admired each other from a distance. The Beatles had grown up on Elvis's music. He was the reason they started a band. Elvis, in turn, respected the Beatles' incredible success and their songwriting talent. They met once, and only once, in August 1965 at Elvis's home in Bel Air, California. The meeting was awkward. The Beatles were starstruck. Elvis was quiet and reserved. They eventually broke the ice by jamming together, playing a few rock and roll oldies. But the creative collaboration that fans dreamed of never materialized, except it almost did. Paul McCartney, a man who seemed to have an endless supply of perfect melodies, actually wrote a song with Elvis in mind. The details are scarce, but McCartney has confirmed in interviews that he penned a specific song that he thought would be perfect for Elvis's voice and style. The problem was he was Paul McCartney, a Beatle, but he was still intimidated by the idea of pitching a song to Elvis Presley. How do you even do that? Do you mail a demo to Graceland? Do you call up Colonel Tom Parker? The machinery around Elvis was impenetrable, even for a Beatle. McCartney has said he didn't know the protocol. He was too shy or too nervous to figure out how to get the song into Elvis's hands. So he never did. The song was never sent. It was never recorded. Its title and melody are lost to history, another great what if. While Elvis never recorded a song written for him by a Beatle, he did embrace their music in his own way, particularly in the 1970s. During his live shows, he often performed powerful orchestra-backed versions of Beatles hits. He sang Yesterday as a tender ballad. He turned George Harrison's Something into a dramatic showpiece, calling it one of the most beautiful love songs ever written. He even tackled the epic Hey Jude, leading the audience in the famous sing-along chorus. These weren't just casual covers. For Elvis to perform a contemporary song, he had to truly connect with it. His choice to sing Beatles songs was a sign of deep respect. It was the king acknowledging the genius of his successors. It was also a way for him to stay relevant, to show his audience that he was still listening, still engaged with modern music. The relationship between Elvis and the Beatles was complex. John Lennon was famously critical of Elvis's post-army career, feeling that he had lost his rebellious edge and sold out to Hollywood. But even Lennon never denied Elvis's foundational importance. Without Elvis, there would have been no Beatles. They were two sides of the same revolutionary coin. And while the dream of an Elvis Sings McCartney hit never came true, the mutual respect was always there, woven into the fabric of rock and roll history. Number 9, what happens when your hero records your song? Jerry Reed, a phenomenal guitarist and rising country star, wrote and recorded the song Guitar Man in 1967, where Elvis heard the record on the radio and decided he had to record it. But his Nashville session musicians couldn't replicate the song's unique, funky guitar part. Elvis's producer had to track down Jerry Reed himself and fly him to the studio in the middle of the night to play guitar on the recording. Jerry Reed was a guitar player's guitar player. He had a unique syncopated claw hammer picking style that was impossible to imitate. He was a force of nature on the instrument. In the late 1960s, he was also a successful songwriter and a recording artist on RCA, the same label as Elvis. In 1967, Reed wrote and recorded a song that was pure autobiography. It was called Guitar Man. The song tells the story of a traveling musician with a gut string guitar, playing in rough bars and beer joints from Mississippi to Memphis, just trying to make a living. It was Reed's own story, and the centerpiece of the record was his incredible, funky, and complex guitar riff. The song was a modest hit on the country charts. One day, Elvis was driving in one of his cars and heard Guitar Man on the radio. He was immediately hooked. The song's vibe, its story, its sound, it was everything he loved. It was authentic Southern music. He knew he had to record it. He scheduled a session at RCA's Studio B in Nashville. He brought in his usual A-team of Nashville session musicians, some of the best players in the world. They were legendary for being able to play anything, but they couldn't play Guitar Man. They listened to Reed's record over and over, but they couldn't figure out the guitar part. The timing was weird. The feel was slippery. It was all in Jerry Reed's hands. After hours of trying and failing, a frustrated Elvis was about to give up and scrap the song. But Felton Jarvis, his producer, had an idea. He said, "Elvis, there's only one person who can play this right. We need to get Jerry Reed." The problem was it was late at night. They didn't know where Jerry Reed was. They started making phone calls. Someone finally tracked him down. He was out on a fishing trip. They got a message to him. "Elvis Presley wants you at the studio right now." Reed was stunned. He dropped his fishing pole, rushed to the airport, and got on a plane to Nashville. He walked into Studio B around midnight, still in his fishing clothes, and there was Elvis Presley, his hero, waiting for him. Elvis smiled and said, "Jerry, I've been trying to cut your song all night. I can't get the sound right. You have to do it for me." Reed, still buzzing from the shock, picked up his nylon string guitar. Elvis and the band stood and watched. He kicked off the song with that unmistakable riff. The studio came alive. Everyone in the room knew this was it. They recorded the song right then and there, with Jerry Reed not just playing the lead part, but essentially co-producing the track, showing the other musicians the feel of the song. They nailed it. Elvis was so thrilled that he immediately decided to record another one of Reed's songs U.S. mail that same night. The session marked the beginning of a great musical friendship. Reed played on several other Elvis recordings. For Jerry Reed, it was the ultimate dream come true. His hero not only recorded his song, but needed him personally to make it happen. It was a profound moment of validation, a story he would tell for the rest of his life. It proved that sometimes to capture something truly authentic, you have to go straight to the source. Number 8, who wrote the first song for the King? Arthur Big Boy Crudup, a Mississippi blues singer, wrote and recorded That's All Right in 1946. Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records, gave the song to a teenage Elvis Presley to try out during his first ever recording session in 1954. Due to a complicated and likely unfair publishing deal, Crudup received very few royalties for the song, even after it launched Elvis's career and changed the world. The story of Elvis's first record is the story of a happy accident, a moment of spontaneous combustion that started a revolution. And at the center of it is a song written by a man who never got his proper due. That man was Arthur Big Boy Crudup. Crudup was a bluesman from Mississippi. He had a raw emotional voice and a simple driving guitar style. In the 1940s, he recorded for RCA Victor's Bluebird label. In 1946, he laid down a track called That's All Right. It was a standard 12-bar blues, but it had a unique, light-hearted feel. It wasn't a deep, sorrowful blues song. It was a shrugging off your troubles kind of song. It was a minor hit in the so-called race records market of the time. Fast forward 8 years to 1954. A young, painfully shy truck driver named Elvis Presley walks into Sun Studio in Memphis. He's there to make a record, maybe just a vanity disc for his mother. The studio is run by Sam Phillips, a visionary producer who is obsessed with recording the raw, authentic music of the South, both black and white. He sees something in this kid, a unique vocal quality, but he can't quite put his finger on it. The first official session is a failure. Elvis is nervous. He's trying to sing smooth ballads like his idol, Dean Martin. He sounds stiff and derivative. Sam Phillips is about to send him home. They take a break. During the break, Elvis, just goofing around, picks up his guitar and starts fooling with an old blues song he knows. That song is Arthur Crudup's That's All Right. But Elvis doesn't sing it like a blues song. He speeds it up. He sings it with a frantic, joyful, almost manic energy. He's slapping the back of his guitar for rhythm. Across the room, bass player Bill Black joins in, slapping his upright bass. Guitarist Scotty Moore picks up on the vibe and starts playing a simple driving lead. It's not blues, it's not country, it's something new. In the control room, Sam Phillips hears this new sound. He sticks his head out the door and shouts, "What was that? Do that again." He quickly hits the record button. They run through the song a few more times, capturing that raw, untamed energy on tape, you know. In that moment, rock and roll was arguably born. Phillips knew he had something special. He took an acetate of the recording to a local DJ, Dewey Phillips, no relation. Dewey played That's All Right on his radio show. The phone lines lit up. People went crazy. They had never heard anything like it. Many listeners assumed the singer was black. When Dewey revealed that Elvis was a white kid who went to Humes High School, the phenomenon began. But what about Arthur Big Boy Crudup? The man who wrote the song that started it all. For years, he saw and heard nothing. His name was on the record, but the royalty checks never came. He was caught in a tangled web of publishing disputes and shady deals. He had sold the rights to his songs long ago for very little money. While Elvis became the biggest star in the world off the back of his tune, Crudup continued to live in poverty, working manual labor jobs. In the 1960s, a blues revival led to renewed interest in Crudup's work. He started to get some recognition. He even tried to sue for back royalties, but the legal battles were long and expensive, and he was largely unsuccessful. It's a sad and common story in the history of American music, where the black innovators who laid the groundwork were often left behind when their music crossed over into the mainstream. Arthur Crudup wrote the spark, but Elvis Presley lit the fire. Number 7, how does a songwriter become the mad professor? Ben Weissman was an accomplished classical pianist who became one of the most prolific and reliable songwriters for Elvis's movies, writing or co-writing 57 songs for the king. Elvis nicknamed him the Mad Professor because of his intense intellectual approach to songwriting. Weissman never had a song rejected by Elvis's publisher, a perfect track record. While Lieber and Stoller were the rebellious geniuses and Doc Pomus was the poetic craftsman, Ben Weissman was the master technician. He was the secret weapon of the Elvis movie machine. If you needed a song that fit a specific scene, had a certain rhythm, and could be delivered by Tuesday, you called Ben Weissman. And Weissman's background was not in rock and roll. He was a classically trained pianist who had studied at the prestigious Juilliard School. He could have been a concert pianist, but he was drawn to the world of pop music. He had a brilliant mind for melody and structure. He could analyze a song, break it down to its component parts, and build a new one from scratch, perfectly tailored to the needs of the client. His first song for Elvis was First in Line, a ballad from Elvis's debut album in 1956, but his real value came during the Hollywood years. From Blue Hawaii to Hermascarum, Ben Weissman's name is all over the soundtrack albums. He wrote an astonishing 57 songs that Elvis recorded. That's more than any other songwriter. His process was methodical. He would receive a script or a synopsis from Hill and Range. It would outline the scene where, a song was needed. For example, Elvis is on a boat. He is sad. The song should be a slow ballad in a minor key. Weissman would then go to his piano and, like a mathematician solving an equation, he would compose a song that fit those parameters perfectly. He understood Elvis's voice better than almost anyone. He knew his range, his phrasing, his strengths. He wrote songs that were designed to showcase that incredible instrument. He could write a rocker like Follow That Dream, a silly novelty tune like Rock a Hula Baby, or a tender ballad like Fame and Fortune. And Elvis respected Weissman's professionalism and his immense talent. During one recording session, Elvis was struggling with a particular musical passage. Weissman, who was present, sat down at the piano and demonstrated how it should be played, his fingers flying across the keys with classical precision. As Elvis was blown away by his skill, he started calling him the Mad Professor because he looked and acted like a brilliant, slightly eccentric academic who had somehow wandered into the world of rock and roll. Weissman had a perfect record. Not a single song he submitted for Elvis was ever rejected. This wasn't because he was a sycophant or because he wrote bland, safe music. It was because he was a master of his craft. He listened to the requirements, he understood the artist, and he delivered a high-quality product every single time. While many of the movie songs from the 1960s are considered lesser works in the Elvis catalog, Weissman's contributions are consistently well-crafted. He brought a level of musicality and professionalism to a process that could often be rushed and commercial. He was not a tortured artist waiting for inspiration to strike. He was a working professional, a hit maker for hire. And for a decade, he was the King's most reliable composer. Number 6, can a rival become a source of hits? Carl Perkins wrote and recorded Blue Suede Shoes after seeing a dancer at a club get angry at his date for scuffing his new shoes. Elvis, a friend and label mate of Perkins at Sun Records, waited for Perkins' own version to become a hit before recording his own, out of respect for his fellow artist. Perkins' career was tragically stalled by a serious car accident just as Blue Suede Shoes was taking off. The early days at Sun Records in Memphis were like a rock and roll incubator. Sam Phillips had an incredible stable of young, hungry artists who were all creating a new sound. There was Elvis, of course, but there was also Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and the man who wrote one of rock and roll's first anthems, Carl Perkins. Perkins was a pioneer of rockabilly. He was a triple threat, a great singer, a phenomenal and innovative guitarist, and a gifted songwriter who wrote his own material. In late 1955, he was playing a show in a small Tennessee town. He noticed a couple on the dance floor. The guy was wearing a brand new pair of blue suede shoes and was dancing very carefully. He kept telling his partner, "Don't step on my suedas." Later that night, Perkins heard the man shout it again. "Hey, don't step on my blue suede shoes." A light bulb went off in Perkins' head. He thought it was a funny line. He went home that night and wrote the song on an old potato sack, The lyrics were a list of things a man would tolerate. You can knock me down, burn my house, steal my car, but the one thing you can't do is mess with his shoes. It was a perfect piece of teenage attitude. He recorded Blue Suede Shoes at Sun Studio. The record was an instant smash. It shot up the pop, country, and R&B charts simultaneously, a rare feat. Carl Perkins was on his way to becoming a superstar, a potential rival to Elvis himself. And Elvis had already left Sun Records for the major label RCA, but he and Perkins were friends. They respected each other. Elvis loved the song and wanted to record it, but he held back. He told his people that it was Carl's song and that he wanted Carl to have the big hit with it. It was a gesture of professional courtesy, something that was often rare in the cutthroat music business. Then, tragedy struck. In March 1956, as Carl Perkins and his band were driving to New York to appear on the Perry Como Show, a major national television appearance that would have made him a household name, they were in a horrific car accident. Carl suffered a fractured skull and a broken collarbone. His brother Jay's neck was broken. The driver of the car was killed. And Carl Perkins was hospitalized for weeks. His career, right at the moment it was about to explode, was put on hold. While he was recovering, RCA decided it was time for Elvis to record Blue Suede Shoes. Elvis cut a powerful, high-energy version of the song. It was also a massive hit, and for many people it became the definitive version. Perkins was never bitter about it. He was grateful that Elvis had recorded his song. The royalties from both versions made him a wealthy man. But he always wondered what might have been if not for that car crash. He had the talent to be as big as Elvis, and fate just had other plans. The story of Blue Suede Shoes is a perfect snapshot of that early rock and roll era, a time of immense creativity, sudden fame, and the thin line between triumph and tragedy. Number 5. What if your publisher is also your competitor? Don Robertson, a prolific Nashville songwriter and pianist, wrote the ballad I'm Counting on You for Elvis's first album. Robertson played piano on the recording session himself, a rare honor for a songwriter. He also had his own successful recording career, which sometimes put him in direct competition with the very artists he was writing for. The Nashville of the 1950s was a tight-knit community. A small group of songwriters, publishers, and session musicians were responsible for a huge number of the country and pop hits coming out of the city. Don Robertson was a key figure in that scene. He was a gifted songwriter with a knack for beautiful, heartfelt melodies, and he was a brilliant pianist with a unique slip note style. Robertson was signed as a writer to Hill and Range, the same publishing house that had the exclusive deal with Elvis. This meant his best songs were automatically funneled toward the biggest star in their stable. In 1956, as Elvis was preparing to record his first album for RCA, a Don Robertson demo landed on the to-be-considered pile. The song was I'm Counting on You. It was a beautiful, tender ballad, full of longing and devotion. It was the perfect vehicle for Elvis to show off the softer, more vulnerable side of his voice, a contrast to the wild rockabilly of songs like Blue Suede Shoes. Elvis loved it. He scheduled it for his first Nashville recording session in January 1956. What made this session special was that Don Robertson was invited to play piano on his own song. This was not standard practice. Usually, a songwriter's job was done once the demo was delivered. The studio work was left to the professional session players, like Floyd Kramer, who played on many of Elvis's other tracks. But Elvis and his producer, Steve Scholes, wanted to capture the specific feel of Robertson's demo. They wanted his unique piano style on the record. So Don Robertson sat down at the piano in RCA's Studio B with Elvis Presley standing a few feet away at the microphone. The legendary guitarist Chet Atkins was also on the session. It was a room full of giants. Robertson played his signature rolling, melodic piano part, and Elvis delivered a stunningly pure and sincere vocal. The result was one of the standout tracks on a truly historic debut album. The relationship was fruitful. Elvis would go on to record a dozen of Robertson songs, including I'm Yours and There's Always Me. But there was a strange twist to their professional relationship. Don Robertson was also a recording artist himself. He had his own record deal and scored a major hit in 1956 with a song called The Happy Whistler. This meant that at times, Don Robertson, the artist, was competing on the pop charts with Elvis Presley, the artist who was singing Don Robertson's songs. It's a perfect example of the complex web of relationships in the old music business. A songwriter, a publisher, a session musician, and a recording star could all be the same person. Don Robertson managed to wear all those hats with success, but his most enduring legacy is the collection of beautiful songs he gave to the king and the story of the day he got to sit at the piano and play while Elvis sang his words. Number 4. Why did Elvis sing his heroes' songs? Chuck Berry's song Promised Land was written while Berry was serving time in a federal prison for a violation of the Mann Act. Elvis recorded the song in 1973 at Stax Records in Memphis, a legendary soul music studio. The recording was a powerful return to his rock and roll roots, but the single initially underperformed on the charts. If Elvis Presley was the king of rock and roll, then Chuck Berry was its poet laureate. Berry was one of the foundational architects of the genre. He wrote the rulebook. His songs were brilliant, witty vignettes of teenage life, full of clever wordplay and driven by his iconic guitar riffs. He was a hero to the generation of musicians that followed him, including the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and Elvis himself. Elvis had been performing Chuck Berry songs in his live shows for years. Songs like Johnny Be Good and Memphis, Tennessee were perfect showcases for his rock and roll energy. But in 1973, he decided to cut a Berry song in the studio. The one he chose was Promised Land. The story behind the song itself is incredible. And Chuck Berry wrote the lyrics in 1963 while he was an inmate at the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, Missouri. He had been convicted of transporting a minor across state lines for immoral purposes, a charge that many believed was racially motivated. In prison, with no guitar, he let his imagination do the traveling. He wrote a lyrical road trip across the United States, a coast-to-coast journey by bus and train. The song is a travelogue of America, from Norfolk, Virginia to Los Angeles, California, the Promised Land. He name-checks cities and landmarks with breathless excitement. It's a song about freedom, written by a man who had none. 10 years later, Elvis was in a creative rut. He was looking for great material. He decided to record at Stax Studio in his hometown of Memphis. Stax was the home of soul music, the studio that produced Otis Redding and Sam and Dave. It was a place with a deep, gritty history. For these sessions, Elvis wanted to get back to basics, to the rock and soul music he loved. He chose to record Promised Land. The song's theme of a long, hard journey to a better place resonated with him on a personal level. He attacked the song with a ferocious energy that had been missing from some of his recent recordings. His voice was strong and clear. The band, which included many of the great Stax session players, laid down a hard-driving, funky groove. It was one of the best and rawest rock and roll recordings he had made in years. When the single was released in 1974, it surprisingly failed to crack the top 10. It was a solid hit, but not the blockbuster that many expected. Perhaps radio had moved on, perhaps Elvis's audience was more interested in his ballads. But over time, the song has come to be regarded as one of his last great rock and roll moments. For Chuck Berry, hearing Elvis's version must have been a moment of sweet vindication. Here was the biggest star in the world paying tribute to his work. The royalties certainly didn't hurt either. The story connects two of rock's founding fathers, the writer in a prison cell, dreaming of the open road, and the king in his studio, bringing that dream to life with thunderous power. Number 3, did a respected folk icon ever pitch to the king? And Elvis was a huge admirer of Bob Dylan's music and recorded his song Tomorrow is a Long Time after hearing a version by folk singer Odetta. Dylan himself was so impressed with Elvis's version that he said it was the cover of one of his songs he treasured most. Despite their mutual admiration, Elvis only ever officially released that one Dylan song. By the mid-1960s, the world of popular music had been split in two. On one side, you had pop and rock and roll represented by Elvis and the Beatles. On the other, you had the folk revival, the music of social consciousness and lyrical poetry, and its undisputed leader was Bob Dylan. They seemed to be from different planets. Elvis was showbiz, Dylan was counterculture, but behind the scenes the lines were blurrier. Elvis, a true student of music, was listening to everything, and he was deeply impressed by Bob Dylan's songwriting. He recognized the power and the poetry in Dylan's lyrics. He reportedly loved the album The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. The one Dylan song that Elvis did record came to him through an indirect route. In 1965, the great folk and blues singer Odetta released an album called Odetta Sings Dylan. On it was her version of a beautiful, wistful song called Tomorrow is a Long Time. The song had been written by Dylan a few years earlier but had not yet been officially released on one of his own albums. Someone in Elvis's camp played him Odetta's version. He was captivated by the song's beautiful melody and its melancholy, yearning lyrics. It was a song about distance and longing, themes that were central to many of Elvis's greatest ballads. He decided to record it. He cut the track in May 1966 during the sessions for the soundtrack of the movie Spin Out. The song was recorded as a bonus track, an afterthought to fill out an album that was otherwise full of forgettable movie tunes. But Elvis's performance was anything but forgettable. He sang it with a breathtaking tenderness and sincerity. His voice was pure and clear. He treated the song with a deep respect, letting the beauty of Dylan's melody and words shine through. It was a stunning piece of singing, one of the hidden gems of his entire career. The song was released, buried on the Spin Out soundtrack, and largely overlooked at the time. But one person who didn't overlook it was Bob Dylan. When a journalist asked him which cover version of his songs was his favorite, he didn't name the Byrds' Mr. Tambourine Man or Jimi Hendrix's All Along the Watchtower. He named Elvis. He said, "I liked Elvis Presley's version of Tomorrow is a Long Time. It was the one he treasured the most." Coming from a man not known for handing out praise, it was a remarkable compliment. Why didn't Elvis record more Dylan songs? The reasons are likely complex. Part of it was the Colonel's tight control over publishing. He wanted songs that Elvis's company, Hill and Range, controlled, and Dylan had his own powerful publisher. Part of it may have been that Dylan's often dense, political, and surreal lyrics didn't always fit the Elvis persona. But for one brief, beautiful moment, the two vastly different worlds of these American musical giants came together. The result was a quiet masterpiece. Number 2, What Happens When the Gatekeeper Says No? Chris Christopherson, then a struggling songwriter and janitor at Columbia Records in Nashville, famously landed a helicopter on Johnny Cash's lawn to get him to listen to a demo tape. While Elvis never officially recorded a Christopherson song in the studio for a single, he was a huge fan and frequently performed Why Me Lord in his concerts. The story of Christopherson's breakthrough illustrates the desperation and creativity required to get past the industry gatekeepers. Before he was a movie star and a country music legend, Chris Christopherson was a Rhodes Scholar, an Army helicopter pilot, and a janitor. He took the janitor job at the Columbia Records building in Nashville. For one reason, it was the center of the music world. It was where his hero, Johnny Cash, recorded. He was hoping that by being in the building, he could somehow get his songs to the right people. For months, he swept floors and emptied ashtrays, all while writing some of the most iconic songs in country music history, like Me and Bobby McGee and Sunday Morning Comin' Down. He would try to slip demo tapes to people, but he was always brushed off. He was just the janitor. The most legendary story of his persistence involves Johnny Cash. After months of getting nowhere, Christopherson, who was still flying helicopters for the National Guard on the side, decided on a wildly audacious plan. He rented a helicopter, flew to Johnny Cash's house, and landed it on his front lawn. He walked up to the door, tape in hand, and gave it to a shocked Johnny Cash. The stunt worked. Cash listened to the tape, loved the songs, and recorded Sunday Mornin' Comin' Down. The song was a massive hit and launched Christopherson's career. While he never had to go to such lengths for Elvis, the story shows the kind of impenetrable wall that surrounded big stars. Christopherson's songs, which were full of raw honesty, literary depth, and world-weary grit, were perfect for the more mature, thoughtful Elvis of the 1970s. And Elvis was, in fact, a huge fan. He loved the song For the Good Times, a heartbreaking ballad of a relationship's final night, which was a hit for Ray Price. He loved Help Me Make It Through the Night, and he particularly connected with a gospel song Christopherson wrote called Why Me Lord. Why Me Lord is a simple, humble prayer. It's a song of a sinner asking for forgiveness and wondering why he is worthy of grace. It's a song that spoke directly to the spiritual and personal struggles Elvis was going through in the last years of his life. He never released a studio version of a Christopherson song as a single. The reasons are likely the usual ones: publishing politics and the Colonel's control. But he made the songs his own on stage. His live performances of Why Me Lord were incredibly powerful. He would often bring his gospel backup group, J.D. Sumner and the Stamps Quartet, to the front of the stage. J.D. Sumner, who had one of the lowest bass voices in music history, would sing a verse. Then Elvis would take over, his voice filled with a raw, pleading emotion. It felt less like a performance and more like a genuine public prayer. These performances, captured on live albums like Elvis recorded live on stage in Memphis, show the deep connection Elvis felt to Christopherson's writing. It was a connection that went beyond the business of making hit records. It was about one artist recognizing the truth and soul in another's work. Christopherson had to land a helicopter to get his songs heard by one hero, but his talent was so undeniable that another hero found the songs all on his own. Number 1. What Made a Woman Break? The Nashville Mold. Cindy Walker was one of the most successful and prolific female songwriters in a Nashville music industry completely dominated by men. She wrote the classic song, You Don't Know Me, which was a hit for Eddie Arnold and Jerry Vale before Elvis recorded it for the Clam Bake soundtrack. Elvis's tender and heartfelt version is considered by many to be the definitive recording of the song. In the world of country music, in the 1940s and 50s, the songwriting rooms and publishing houses were a man's world. It was a business run by men for men, but one woman broke through that barrier with sheer undeniable talent. Her name was Cindy Walker. Walker was a force of nature. She was a gifted poet and a brilliant melodist from a small town in Texas. She didn't just write a few hits. She wrote hundreds. She wrote major hits for nearly every big country star of her era, from Bob Wills' Cherokee Maiden to Gene Autry. She was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. She did it all on her own terms, working from her mother's home in Texas, far from the politics of Music Row. Her process was unique. She would often get an idea for a song, and her mother, who was also a talented musician, would help her work out the melody. She would then pitch her songs by mail or by making trips to Nashville. One of her most enduring songs is You Don't Know Me. She co-wrote the song with the country star Eddie Arnold in 1955. It's a masterpiece of unrequited love. The lyrics tell the story of someone who is secretly in love with a friend, someone they see every day but who has no idea of their true feelings. The pain and longing in the line. You give your hand to me and then you say goodbye. I watch you walk away beside the lucky guy. You'll never know the one who loves you so. It had become a standard. By 1967, the song was already a well-known classic. That's when Elvis decided to record it. It was an unusual choice for a movie soundtrack. The film was Clam Bake, one of his weakest and most formulaic comedies. The soundtrack was filled with forgettable songs about boats and beaches, but in the middle of all that fluff, Elvis delivered a performance of You Don't Know Me that was absolutely stunning. He ignored the silly context of the film and sang the song with a deep, aching sincerity. His vocal was tender, restrained, and full of subtle emotion. He wasn't the swaggering rock and roller or the Las Vegas showman. He was a pure vocalist interpreting a beautifully written song. He connected with the lyric's sense of loneliness and isolation, feelings that were likely very familiar to him, the most famous and most isolated man in the world. His version, tucked away on a mediocre soundtrack, might have been lost. But over the years, fans and critics have rediscovered it. Many now consider it the definitive version of the song, the one that best captures the heartbreaking sadness at its core. The story is a testament to two things. First, the incredible pioneering talent of Cindy Walker, a woman who wrote some of the most enduring songs of the 20th century in a world that wasn't built for her. And second, Elvis's unique gift as an interpreter. He could find the emotional truth in a song, regardless of its source or its context, and make it his own. He might not have known Cindy Walker personally, but through her song, he showed that he understood the universal human heart she wrote about so beautifully.